Manchester United are about to enter their biggest rebuild yet. Amorim's here to stay, and it looks like Bruno could be out of the door, truly symbolising the end of an era at the club, be it for good or bad. Now, Amorim's arrival at the club signified a complete shift in everything United has been recently. His system, built on the three at the back formation, which utilises high pressing, aggressive structure, and not just talent, but high athleticism, physicality, the ability to be mobile. They're all things that are integral to Amorim's success. However, right now, Casemiro is the one that sits at the heart of that midfield. Now, he's a legendary player, no question about it, one of the best modern defensive midfielders of his generation. But at 33 years old, he's not getting any younger. He was never part of Amorim's long-term plans. He never signed him. He was way before Amorim. He was part of a whole different vision for the club. There's also the fact that his legs are slowing, his recovery speed's fading. We've seen that he can only play one game a week at best, and sometimes even then it's a question about whether he can play to the level required to be at the top level of the Premier League. And so in a system that thrives on covering transitions and open spaces, Casemiro's not the solution. And so to help our team in attack, I think United are calling out for a defensive destroyer. Now, Ugarte is that. However, for whatever reason, something is clearly not working out for him. And so there are huge question marks and red flags about whether he is the long-term Casemiro replacement here. And so what we truly need is someone that can be relied upon to tidy up the mistakes of others and recycle possession safely and intelligently. And this is exactly where the player I have scouted comes in. Ege Tıknaz, which I've definitely said wrong. Now, he's a product of the Besiktas Academy after being scouted at just 9 years old for dominating youth matches. Like many, his love for football started with Lionel Messi, with Tiknaz becoming obsessed with watching him at the 2010 World Cup. But that's clearly not who he bases his game on. Rather, Tiknaz built his game around other idols, most notably Busquets and Pogba, a tall, deep-lying controller midfielder who can read the game, win the ball, and keep possession moving. And him being 6'4" is a big win for United, I think. We have a really physically weak and short team, especially with the likes of Cunha and maybe Mbemo coming in. Casemiro is one of our very few aerial presences, and it cannot be understated how important it's going to be to replace that in the team when he goes. That's why it's not as simple as just saying have Ugarte, Menu, or even someone like Kone from the youth be Casemiro's long-term replacement, because they're not even remotely similar, and whilst they are good and theoretically can do the job, they don't have that same important skill set. Like I said, if we could get some height somewhere else on the pitch, it wouldn't be an issue. I mean, Kante was one of the best midfielders of his generation, and he was 5'6". Now, talent alone doesn't tell Tiknaz's full story here. You see, by 16, he suffered a serious back injury that sidelined him for 7 months. Then at 18, he got a knee ligament injury. And so there are two ways you could view this. The green flag way of looking at this could be two major injuries that could have completely derailed his entire development, instead helped build who he is. For example, during rehab, Tiknaz, when he couldn't focus on his lower body due to his injuries, he looked at his weaknesses and instead focused on his upper body to get some physical strength. Something that, as I said, we lack and would help him fit into the Premier League. Furthermore, you could look at these drastic injuries and see his comeback from them and say that it's a great example of phenomenal mental fortitude. Again, something that is needed not only to perform at top level, but to perform at a club like Manchester United. But of course, there's then the red flag way of looking at things, and so you could say that this is worrisome and maybe signs of a long-term injury-prone player if he gets a recurring injury. Who knows? But what I'm about to tell you is the exact reason why that shouldn't be too much of a risk. And so now let's dive into why the data make this so interesting. First, defensively. This is where Tiknaz truly shines. He's in the 91st percentile for dual success rate and 97th percentile for defensive actions. Overall, he excels in blocking, tackling, but above all, interceptions. This guy is like a spider. He reads the game very well, and it's a skill that would really help us out in the defensive transition, winning the ball back early in a good place before then using his tidy footwork to get a counter-attack going or safely recycle possession and calm things down. And the spider similarities don't end there actually. What I mean by that is he loves a slide tackle, and the way that he wraps his leg around the ball to win it back reminds me a lot like a certain Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Now, a player that loves to go to ground for tackles can be a bit of a worry, especially in the Premier League, because let's be real, a lot of the time, the referees suck ass. I would be concerned about the amount of red cards he could potentially pick up for the slightest mistake when he goes to ground, purely because he could build himself a reputation for going to ground aggressively. We've literally seen it happen with Casemiro like a year or two ago, where he would get red cards when other players wouldn't, purely for the reputation he had built up going to ground. Now, going forward, Tiknaz isn't exactly incredible, but that's not what he's here to do. He's in the 65th percentile for forward passes, 80th percentile for forward pass accuracy, and 68th percentile for progressive passes. That being said, he's got a nice switch of play in him, which is always a positive and something that Casemiro also enjoys, and so yeah, that checks out as his replacement. But here's where things get really interesting. His market value. We know INEOS are obsessed with good market opportunities. More specifically, young talent for a good price that they believe is on the cusp of leveling up. Euro Heaven, Kone, Chido, and that's exactly what I think makes Tiknaz such a no-brainer transfer. There is almost zero downside to it. Last season, he was on loan at Rio Ave in Portugal on loan from Besiktas, but they have an option to buy him for just 5 million euros. Yes, 5, which is around about £3.7 million. Now, Rio Ave are apparently planning to trigger that clause and then flip him on for a profit, probably looking to double their investment and sell him for around, I don't know, 10 to 15 million euros. Now, Fabrizio Romano has confirmed that Bundesliga and Serie A clubs are interested in the player, with other sources saying that Sporting could be interested, which is very interesting. Let me tell you why. Tiknaz is perfect for Amorim's system. At Sporting, he previously had Hjulmand as a key component to his midfield. A defensive monster who anchored the system with his ability to read the game, break up play, and keep possession circling. And one look at their profiles shows you just how similar they are and why Sporting are interested. He actually outperformed Hjulmand despite playing in a worse team. Thus, with Sporting probably preparing for life without Hjulmand, knowing that he's due a big transfer, it makes sense why they're after Tiknaz. And no doubt United would be one of the clubs interested in signing Hjulmand. But with him valued at around 50 million euros and Tiknaz between 5 and 10, 15, it would represent an unmissable market opportunity for Amorim and INEOS in an era where clearly every penny matters. But there are things beyond data that can be as if not more important to what makes a transfer a success or not. Mentality and attitude. I think despite being just 20 years old, Tiknaz shows signs that he is mature beyond his years. For starters, in an interview a couple years ago with The Athletic, he spoke about how he lives football 24/7. He said he's never really had a social life and has only 2 friends outside of football. Everything else in his life revolves entirely around the sport and becoming the best version of himself on the pitch. Which is of course something that's obviously true, as it's reflected in his great injury rehab, and how he used that setback as a moment to propel him further. Now, does this mean that United should go get him, make him start every game, and he'd be guaranteed success? Clearly not. Now, I actually think the Portuguese league seems to translate quite well to Premier League. There's a lot of instances of where there's been great successes there. That being said, I think it's unfair to just throw this guy into the deep end and have him start for us when he barely cost anything, he's so young, and he's very early into his professional career. Because whilst I think in the long term he could be a good Casemiro replacement, if you were to bring him in now, he should be viewed more as a Casemiro understudy. Have him play the odd game, maybe the games where Casemiro's legs can only last last 60 minutes, with a long-term view of perhaps having him start more games or all the games the following season. That being said, this isn't just about replacing Casemiro. It's about upgrading Manchester United's long-term system fit, bringing in a young talent who has the potential to give you exactly what you need in the modern game for pennies. I'm amazed that INEOS aren't all over something like this, but if his career goes how I truly think it could do, then I wouldn't be surprised that if in 2 years we're linked to him for 50 million anyway. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. Who do you want to be that long-term Casemiro replacement? Is it Ugarte? Would you want to take the risk on someone like this? I remember about 3 years ago when we were linked with Caicedo way before he even joined Brighton, and we turned our noses up at it. That didn't turn out to be a mistake now, did it? Could it happen again? Who knows?